Hello, my name is Reverend Dr. May Elise Cannon. Today is Sunday, September 22nd. Today is day 352 since October 7th. War continues to rage in the Middle East today. Several Israelis in northern Israel were wounded as Hezbollah fired 85 rockets towards Haifa, towards that area, and the IDF and Hezbollah continued to exchange fire on the northern border of Israel and the southern border of Lebanon. The IDF claimed to have hit 400 locations in Lebanon as the hostilities heated up further today. And in Gaza, reports indicate that there were at least 30 Palestinians killed in the Israeli bombing of multiple locations across the Gaza Strip since dawn. I've been thinking a lot this week and praying the breath prayer. Lord, soften my heart and don't let my heart be hardened. Today is Sunday, and as such, I like to take a few moments and reflect daily as we watch the number of deaths in Gaza, as we hear about airstrikes on schools, horror after horror. As there's no news daily about the hostages, no updates on how many might still be alive, I found myself thinking that today isn't that bad of a day. The death toll in Gaza is only a couple of dozen people. And it's not that those people who've been killed, it's not that they don't matter. It's just that compared to the death tolls that we saw in October or November, when the death tolls some days or many days or most days was more than 100, if we have a day that the death tolls more than 20, it's not as bad compared to 150 or something like that. And I know that that's absurd, but I find myself thinking that. And then I think, what kind of person am I? Like, what have I become that here we are 352 days in that I think that's not a bad day? It's not a bad day when 24 people die instead of 124. When we hear that, at least 30 Palestinians killed and that number is not that high in comparison, God have mercy. What kind of perspective is that? And so my prayer has been, Lord, soften my heart. Don't let my heart be hardened. I talked a few weeks ago about how can we not be apathetic? And why are so many Christians apathetic towards the suffering or death of Palestinians? And, when did my thinking become so normalized that the initial death tolls that we saw that were 100 or sometimes 200 or more a day, and I thought that it could be a good day when the numbers were what they are now. Still, on average, when you look at 40,000 plus killed, it's still well over 100 a day when you average it out. It is horrific. More than 50% of the population in acute hunger. Lord, don't let my heart be hardened. That's my breath prayer. It led me to the passage in Hebrews chapter 3. The context is the retelling of the story when God rescued the Jewish people from slavery in Egypt, the Exodus story. The passage is about how the people of God saw the ways that he had provided for them in the desert for 40 years, and yet they were still tempted in the wilderness. And the passage says that their hearts went astray. Bible Reference Online does a bit of an exegesis, a bit of an explanation, and in answering the question of what does this verse mean, chapter 3, verse 15 in the book of Hebrews, that verse says, "Today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as you did in the rebellion." The analysis says that verses 12 through 14 brought on a very direct application of a psalm, Psalm 95. Israel suffered discipline in the wilderness because the people acted in a faithless and stubborn way. The author of Hebrews warned readers not to make the same mistake. In fact, we, as followers of Christ, should exhort one another, encourage and challenge each other to avoid such things. So daily, as we're paying attention to what's happening in Gaza, on the border between Lebanon and Israel, as so many things pull us in so many different directions, and as there's so many great needs and even wars in other parts of the world, as we watch and pay attention to what's happening in Lebanon, in the Golan, in North Israel, in Gaza, with the thousands of people injured last week with the pager and walkie-talkie explosions and the dozens of deaths, may we encourage one another to not let our hearts be hardened. The situation is urgent and critical, and every day people continue to die. And it sounds so dramatic, and yet it's true. And I've been preaching and teaching, every day last week for the most part. And last Sunday, I gave a message at First Covenant in Seattle. And this is a message I've been sharing all over the country, that church, we have to do better. We have to love better. And not only do we have to ask God to not allow our hearts to grow hard and to not be apathetic, as we've been talking about, but we also have to be motivated to respond and engage wherever there is brokenness and evil in the world. We've talked many, many times about Romans chapter 10, verse 9, Romans chapter 12, verse 9, love must be sincere, hate what is evil, and cling to what is good. And every day, Palestinians in Gaza are dying. They're going hungry without clean water, and they're losing loved ones, and people are being killed in other parts of the Middle East. Israelis are no safer than they were yesterday, and Palestinians are still struggling for freedom and living under occupation in fear of settler attack or military incursion. There have been constant deaths in the West Bank over past months. The death toll in the West Bank is now 772 fatalities, including 181 children since January of 2023. And Hebrews chapter 3, verse 15 says, "Today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as you did in the rebellion." There must be a call. That today is a call for urgency. Bible reference says this is not a topic to be taken lightly, to be put off for some other time. The nation of Israel itself failed. This is the biblical nation it's talking about, to hold fast to their trust in God. Hebrews 3:6, and it cost them dearly. They were not cut off from God, just as Christians would not be in risk of losing their salvation, but they were denied their inheritance due to their stubbornness. Someone said to me this past week after one of my talks, they said, "May, you're so courageous. You're calling out on the church. You're speaking so boldly." And they probably said that just because of the rawness of my emotion. I've been such a wreck. For those of you that saw me speak at Christ at the Checkpoint in Bethlehem in May, I just sobbed. I cried from the beginning of the message until the end. And I feel like not only have I been raw, I feel like I've either been yelling or I've been sobbing. And other times I feel like I'm just going through the motions and that I'm barely making it through the day. But if I'm honest, and I felt really convicted about this past week, my heart is hard. Sometimes I feel like it's as hard as stone. And I feel like I'm not courageous. When Romans says love must be sincere, I believe that Jesus calls us to love so much more than how we're doing as a church. And yes, that absolutely means paying attention to Palestinian Christians in ways that we are just not doing. But that's just a starting point. It means so much more than just Palestinian lives matter, which we haven't even gotten to. It means so much more than just human rights and equalities. I believe that Jesus calls us to a love that is so radical that it means not only should we demand that the atrocities stop, which we haven't even started saying as a church, not only should the violence against the people of Gaza be brought to an end, not only should we boldly love Palestinians, but Jesus would also demand that we love Israeli soldiers and that we would love every person that's holding guns and perpetrating violence, not that we would tolerate the violence that they perpetrate. Don't get me wrong, and don't conflate what I'm saying. I'm not saying tolerate injustice. We have to stand up to injustice. But I'm saying I think that Jesus would call us to love the perpetrators of it. And as horrific as it is for me to say, and as much as it hurts me to say it, I think Jesus would say that even means to love Hamas, that it means loving whoever's the militant, wherever they might be. That Jesus on the cross, when he said next to the murderer that was being crucified, the convicted murderer, that Jesus, when he heard that murderer say, "Remember me when you come into your kingdom," Jesus responded and said, "Truly, I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise." What kind of radical love did Jesus possess that he would forgive even one who committed so heinous of a crime? What if we were to picture the very people that we perceive as our enemies in place of that murderer in our minds? Oh, how my heart is hard. Might we be so forgiving? Might I be so forgiving? And I've been praying that prayer all week long. Lord, soften my heart and do not let my heart be hardened. I've been thinking about how little love there is within me, how much hatred still exists in my soul, that I need the transforming power of God to soften my heart. I think that's what Jesus meant in the Sermon on the Mount when he said, you've heard it said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven. That's Matthew 5:43. I don't think we have any idea what it means to love our enemies. I know that I don't, but I pray that God would teach us. I've been talking about Romans 12. I know you've heard me say it. Love must be sincere. Hate what is evil. Cling to what is good. And that passage talks a lot about what it means to love our enemies. Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse. Rejoice with those who rejoice and mourn with those who mourn. And that passage continues and it says, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he's thirsty, give him something to drink. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. May our hearts not be hardened, and may we daily learn to love better. Might we not be overcome by evil, which these days seems so very, very easy to do. But by the grace of God, might evil be overcome with good. In the name of Christ, amen.